Hello, everybody. This is Fernando starting an all new playlist here for my YouTube channel. I was actually inspired to do this by watching another recent video involving this similar theme. And then in looking at YouTube overall, I saw other channels were doing the same thing. So I thought, why not share this here within my channel, but focus on some of the subjects, movies, and other interesting topics that I find that I want to share here within this playlist. So such is the case with regards to this, that I'm going to start with this inaugural playlist that I'm going to call 20 Things You Didn't Know About. And this one, this very first video, is going to focus on the Godzilla 2014 film. It's a fan favorite of mine. I'm sure a lot of you out there have the same kind of love for this movie as well. Obviously, it helped kickstart the whole MonsterVerse universe as well. So why not? Why not showcase that here and then talk about 20 things you didn't know about the Godzilla 2014 film. Great stuff. I found some of this stuff online, and then I'll get my own thoughts and opinions on each one too. So let's go ahead and let's start that here, and let me know in the comments below too what you guys think. If you want me to continue with this particular playlist, maybe have some other recommendations as well to talk about 20 things you didn't know about. And then that way I'll be able to take a look, and I might actually start taking suggestions on it soon. So in no particular order, here are the items associated with the Godzilla 2014 film. For starters, did you know that the scars that are listed or placed on Godzilla within the film are actually referred to as keloid scars? These are raised, thick patches of skin that are indicative to some of the gruesome marks that are found in survivors and victims of both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, for the sake of the video, I'm not going to post any pictures of those actual wounds that some of the survivors and other victims had, but Godzilla has those very same scars. And so this was done as again a nod to that tragic situation. And so anytime you're looking at Godzilla within the MonsterVerse, and I imagine also within some of the previous films beforehand, that's where you see his skin, why it looks like that rough, why it looks like it has those raised indentations and so on. It's basically an allusion to keloid scars. Number two is this. This film at the time had the largest number of effect shots within any Godzilla movie. It makes sense, right? This was a big budget movie from Legendary Pictures. This was going to be a summer tentpole movie too. Those are the big ones, in other words, that movie companies tend to focus all of their money, all of their marketing into. And so there was going to be almost 1,000 visual effects shots featured within it. I imagine there would have even been more had there been more monster on monster battles instead of the slow buildup that the movie had throughout the first part of the film. But did you know also that the 3D model of Godzilla alone had more than 500,000 polygons? So he was there in the movie. He wasn't there for too much, but still a lot of dedication was given to him and to make sure that he appeared as realistic as possible. So definitely it outtrans anything else as far as previous Godzilla movies. Number three was this. His original location where he was going to be found was going to be in a glacier. Isn't that neat? Apparently he was going to be frozen solid. He was going to be found, who knows, it was either by maybe some scientists or by some other people that were there within the movie script. But this was ultimately changed because Legendary Pictures, who had also been making the Man of Steel movie, realized that it was going to be very, very similar. So instead of having him found within a glacier, all preserved, instead it was switched to him finally making his reveal within the middle part of the movie, just as is. So interesting stuff as far as the two universes kind of making one have to switch things to another one. And then number four is this. The slow buildup that I was mentioning earlier is inspired by Jaws, the 1975 film. According to the actor Bryan Cranston, he stated that Gareth Edwards, who is the director of the film, wanted to do that similar type of slow burn. The way he described it was this: the film does not immediately show the beast, but rather builds up to its appearance while still delivering an eerie and terrifying off-screen presence. And so because of this, it makes his entrance finally towards the middle of the film, whenever he takes on the first Muto, in this case the winged Muto, it makes him have to be able to have his grand entrance, and then that makes it much more prominent. I was kind of a little hesitant on that. Originally, I wanted Godzilla to appear much more earlier, in other words, before the big reveal, but still having him have that grand presence definitely made a bigger impact. Number five was this. The design associated with Godzilla went through many iterations. This was by far one of the biggest tasks because of the importance of the design. It had to look like Godzilla, but it had to be different from all of the other previous movies. This was going to be, again, a big tentpole franchise movie. This was going to start things from scratch. And so because of it, it also had to be a design that would stick, something that would basically be passed on to the next set of movies. And so this is what Gareth Edwards stated when it came to all these designs and the inspirations for them. He said, the way I tried to view it was, imagine Godzilla was a real creature and someone from Toho saw him in the 1950s, ran back to the studio to make a movie about the creature, and then was trying his best to remember and draw it. And in our film, you get to see him for real. It was important that this felt like a Toho Godzilla. So clearly this was also going to be something that would be designed with the Toho studio in mind. Unlike the 1998 film, this was going to be something where it would clearly look like Godzilla, but again, still feel different. I saw lots of still ties to the Godzilla 1985 suit. I think especially with regards to the scowl that Godzilla 2014 had. Let me know too what you think about that in the comments below. Number six was this. Gareth Edwards was the director, but another director was originally considered to take over the job, and that was going to be Guillermo del Toro, one of the most famous sci-fi / fantasy directors that are out there. In this case, he wasn't able to do it because he was doing another similar kaiju / monster film at the time that was Pacific Rim, so he wasn't able to take on the Godzilla job. But one could basically wonder what would have happened had Guillermo del Toro done the Godzilla film instead. I would easily see anything as far as the Mutos have a much more outlandish design, not in a bad way, not necessarily in a good way, but just completely different from before. He is known for having some of the most fantastical looking creatures within his movies, so I could see more of something when it comes to the Mutos species, and who knows, maybe even more of something else involving Godzilla. That would definitely be the upfront thing, and obviously you think that Ron Perlman would be making an appearance somewhere within the Godzilla film too, since he's a staple in all of the Guillermo del Toro films. Number seven is this. Part of the design to make it stand out was to have Godzilla be the largest one in the franchise, at least at that time. He's already been outtranced by some of the other movies that have come out afterward, but when Godzilla 2014 came out, Godzilla stood 355 feet tall. And then if you consider the tail, everything all together, it's even beyond that. It would have been 550 feet tall and measuring about 90,000 tons. So this would have made Godzilla not only been the tallest within the entire franchise, but also the heaviest too. Interesting stuff. They clearly wanted to make sure that Godzilla was going to be different than everything else from before, and that included making it the very largest one. Of course, we've seen, especially on the Netflix one, the Netflix show, how one of the Godzillas there far outtranced anyone else. Number 8 is this. It was interesting. I didn't catch it the first time, but I had to see later on, once I was rewatching the movie, how much it definitely stood out. Godzilla was definitely the last of his kind in the movie, but what turns out to be the demise of the previous Godzillas were the Mutos. It was heavily hinted at throughout parts of the movie, but one that I didn't catch up front was the fact that those Muto spores were in that fossilized skeleton. Remember that in the film? How there was an eerie shot showcasing a giant skeleton and then what looked like some mutos having dragged themselves out and then going out into the land itself. Well, it turns out that that fossilized skeleton was a Godzilla. I didn't catch that the first time, but once I was reading this information, it was interesting to see it, that was the case. You're looking at a long lost relative of Godzilla. Who knows? Maybe even the Godzilla 2014 Godzilla knew that particular the species that was wiped out, and that monster, in other words, and so this could have been made things much more personal afterward. Number 9 was this: the Mutos themselves were actually one of the first American-made kaiju. This stands out because a lot of times, a lot of the Toho Studio films, they'll have their own new kaiju, or they recycle many of the fan favorites out there, like Mechagodzilla, and then of course Rodan and so on. But here in this case, here you have a situation where it's an American one. The 1998 film did not have any kaiju within them, within the film itself. Instead, it was just Godzilla versus the military. So here was a first, but there would have been actually a second had the original 1994 Godzilla film. This was the one that was going to be made by John DeBont and others. It too was going to feature its own original American kaiju by the name of the Griffin. So if that would have come out first, then this would have made the Mutos the second American-made kaiju. But here in this case, they were actually the very, very first ones. And then number 10 is this. The film itself was, again, a tentpole film. It was going to be something that was going to mark the time period, like in other words, a big summer movie for the middle of the year and then create the franchise. Because of it, it needed to have a big budget, and it was. It was actually larger than the entire gross, the U.S. gross of the 1998 Godzilla film. In fact, it was almost like a secret for the longest time. What was the budget of the Godzilla 2014 film? It was heavily guarded. Like, there was not much information that could be found as far as what those numbers were. And I happened to find it one time, and I released it back when I was doing the Godzilla movie podcast videos. It was 160 million. I just happened to find it in some weird financial article. And then once that happened, it looks like that number stuck, and it was mentioned in other places too. So anything involving the budget, it definitely got what it deserved. 160 million was more than enough to make sure that the film had the big bang spectacle effects and actions that it needed. And I'm glad that that was the case. If it would have gone under budget, I don't think we would have gotten the spectacle that it deserved. Number 11 was this, and I cited this too when I was doing the original review. In the theaters, and then after in the home video, there was, like, in other words, like DVD, Blu-ray, there was a common criticism associated with the film's brightness, especially towards the end. Boy, was that movie dark. It got really dark whenever Godzilla started to fight the Mutos there in the city. I mean, there were some portions on there where it was just unbearable. It was very hard to be able to see what was happening. I guess Gareth Edwards' realism, like, he wanted to make sure that everything was as realistic as possible. And in that situation, having the city almost have a blackout between the fights associated with Godzilla and the Mutos, and then have it be where it's at the dead of night too caused the movie to be so dark. Unfortunately, when it was released later on DVD and Blu-ray, this was even more exasperated. It turns out that there was a glitch associated with the brightness that transferred over to the versions featured in both streaming and then both DVD and Blu-rays. This caused the brightness to be even lowered. So it's not you. If you're thinking, wow, this movie is really dark, what's going on? Maybe I need to turn up the brightness. Maybe my own settings are wrong on the TV. No, it was definitely something else. It was something else altogether different with regards to those settings. I'm glad to see though that in the second and third films the brightness was turned up, and so definitely it made an impact afterward. Number 12 is this. I was mentioning earlier about the 1994 film, the one that was going to be done by John DeBont and others. It actually takes the Godzilla 2014 film. It takes many of the features from the script of that canceled film and almost coyly transferred them over into this movie. It's very, when I say coy, it's like, it's not direct, but it's indirect. Like, it's the kind of stuff where it makes you wonder how much purposefulness was associated with it. For example, the big setting at the end of the movie happened in San Francisco. Well, in the 1994 film, what would have been, there would have also been a San Francisco showdown, and it would have also involved the Golden Gate Bridge being destroyed. On top of that, there was also the Griffin that I was mentioning earlier. That too was a flying monster. And then on top of that, there was going to be a segment where the main characters in the 1994 film were going to have their parents killed during one of the earlier sessions of the movie, and then it would jump over to the present time. Very similar again to what the 2014 film had as far as the Brody character as well. And then finally, Godzilla's own atomic breath was going to be used in the 1994 film to also decapitate the Griffin. So here you have a situation where Godzilla does the very same thing to the Muto, the final Muto that it was taking out. So very interesting too, right? The illusions associated with between the two films makes you wonder again how much is purposefulness and how much is just random happen chance. Number 13, talking about Bryan Cranston again. I remember the marketing at the time was very big on him. This was because of the Breaking Bad days, right? Like Breaking Bad was in full swing. He was as popular as can be. His character was as well. There was just so much Comic-Cons that were featuring his cosplay, like people walking around and all these posters about Breaking Bad and so on. And so the big push at the time was showcasing Bryan Cranston for the Godzilla 2014 film, almost again, and I use that word coyly, almost again making it seem like it was going to be a showdown between both of them. What a surprise, right? When the movie came out and then people suddenly realized, oops, he has not only just a very shortened time period within the film, but spoiler alert, he ends up dying within the film too. And almost like it was he's there 1 minute and then he's gone the next, and then it focuses on the Brody character. So this was definitely something that, I don't know, the marketing definitely, knew what they were doing. They were trying to get as many people in the seats at the theaters. They were definitely using Bryan Cranston's popularity at the time to do so. But once people saw it, they realized that it was almost like a bait and switch. I do remember the comments on that too. At the time when the movie came out, especially on IMDb, there was a lot of hoopla associated with it. Number 14, there's this. Part of the creation of the film involved sound. It wanted to make the people there, in the production wanted to make sure that they could get as much realism as possible to get the best effect going. And so in their case, they created an 18-foot wide speaker. It was actually 12 feet high as well. And it had one intention. It was going to blast Godzilla's roar at 100,000 watts. I'm guessing the filmmakers wanted to make sure that people were aware of just how powerful that blast was. And that way, if they were acting things out, they were going to get a good context of what they were dealing with. Can you imagine that, though? Can you imagine Godzilla's iconic roar at full blast, 100,000 watts coming from a 12-foot high and 18-foot wide speaker. The sound of something like that would have easily made anything else just quiet. Like there must have been animals surrounding that production miles away that were probably running away at that time. Number 15 is this. There was cooperation from the United States Navy during the 2014 production of the film. That's why you saw many prominent scenes showcasing that as far as the naval carriers and so on. They were, as far as the United States Marine Corps, they were also invited to be able to participate in the production, but they ended up not doing so. This was interesting because for the 1998 American film, that one, the United States Marine Corps did participate, but apparently they did not have a good experience, or they did not have experience that they wanted to do one more time for this film. Unknown why that is. Like, what was the bad reasons, or if any reason whatsoever, for the United States Marine Corps not doing something again for the 2014 film, but at least the United States Navy did cooperate throughout the making of the film too. Number 16, let's go ahead and let's talk about the Mutos again. If you're wondering where some of their inspirations came from the design, here's some of them. The biggest one that stood out is Alien. Obviously, like the head of the Mutos distinctly looks or pays homage to the elongated block-like head from the Alien from the 1979 film. And then the other one that stood out is the Starship Troopers, the aliens that were featured there, the bugs, in other words, and from the 1997 film. You saw the multiple appendages, the multiple legs that the Mutos had. That definitely seemed to come from the Starship Troopers bugs as well. Jurassic Park was another set of monsters, or in this case animals, that were inspired. And then finally King Kong, the original 1933 film, also played some inspiration to the designs. I remember Gareth Edwards mentioning too that the design for the Mutos almost took as long as the design for Godzilla to create something again that was original, but something that would fit within the new mythos associated with the MonsterVerse. Number 17, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, something that was a little bit of a criticism of the film. And even though he is the actual title character, even though, of course, he is the main star of the entire franchise, it takes nearly 1 hour for Godzilla to be within the film. This was frustrating. I still find it frustrating to this day. I'm so glad the rest of the movies did not do that anymore, because once he appears, it definitely kickstarts the movie, but it took 1 hour to do so. I think it could have been shortened well before that. I mean, obviously this is an origin film. This is something, again, starting off a certain universe. But the fact that it took that long, and at the same time it cuts to something else immediately afterward, and basically you'll finally see Godzilla towards the end in all of his glory in terms of his one-on-one matches. That was also another heavy criticism, something that I rightfully agreed. In fact, if you wanted to tally the total number of minutes, he's only in the film for 11 minutes. Isn't that nuts? So definitely the other films cleared that. They were able to correct things and had him featured much more prominently. But otherwise, that's again a common criticism. Number 18 is this. One of the prominent scenes that stood out involved the destruction of the Golden Gate Bridge. That was when the son of Ford's character, Brody's character, was there, and it was there on the bus, and then they realized all of a sudden that Godzilla is nearby, and then he topples into the Golden Gate Bridge whenever he gets struck by some of the military's assault missiles and so on. Well, a 400-foot tall model of the Golden Gate Bridge was built. It was actually built there. In fact, you'll see here, this was real. Like, in other words, this was something that there were cars on, there were tanks on as well. It definitely added to the realism associated with it. And then you'll see like the green screen in the background, just to make sure that everything else could be added in. But it definitely helped heighten the tension associated with that scene. I love that scene. That was a really powerful scene to showcase Godzilla's ominous roar in the background that suddenly silences all the kids within the bus. Everyone looks outward, and then of course that's when the military starts attacking, or in this case, the Naval Air Force starts attacking. Number 19, in this case, it has to do with Godzilla one more time. You'll see, as far as I was mentioning earlier, the scars that encompass his body. But if you pay close attention, he also has gills both on the left and the right side of his very, very broad neck. This was done to make sure that Godzilla, because it's a creature that is in the water so very much, obviously has to breathe in the water. And so, interestingly enough, in the film, he's considered more of an amphibian rather than a reptile, or at least as close to whatever type of species Godzilla is within the context of being more of an amphibian. But this was very distinct because I don't recall any of the other films having this type of stuff as far as gills and so on. But definitely this is a one-of-a-kind thing that kickstarted Godzilla's new design, and it's stuck ever since then within the MonsterVerse. And then finally, number 20, when it comes to my list here of 20 things you didn't know about, it has to do with this. The film was again going to be the big blockbuster for Legendary Pictures and Warner Brothers and Toho Studios. Everything was gearing up for it. The marketing was going to be there. The crowds were going to be there too. Now it was just waiting on the opening date. Was it going to be a success? And it's always a gamble, right? Because sometimes studios think that it's a sure done deal, and then it turns out it tanks. So I imagine the same thing was happening with everyone that was involved. Well, it was a big success. Came in number 1 at the box office. Had what's considered good legs. In other words, extension of time when it comes to the staying power of people buying tickets and continuing to rewatch the movie. So much so, in fact, that it was only 2 days later, right after the premiere, that not one but 2 sequels were green-lit. They were officially announced, and then that way the film could continue with its franchise. We, of course, saw that afterward with Godzilla King of the Monsters, and then finally Godzilla vs. Kong. So Godzilla 2014 was a big success. It also had some good revenue overseas, obviously, because of the international appeal of Godzilla, and it had the trifecta associated with great revenues on the home video side. So DVDs, streaming, and Blu-rays, those had some fantastic numbers as well. So great stuff when it came to the movie having those 2 sequels and the success that came in afterward too. But let me know what you guys think. That's pretty much it. 20 things you didn't know about the Godzilla 2014 film. Post it in the comments below. If I missed anything else that stood out, let me know what your thoughts are as far as continuing this playlist as well. And I'll be happy to do many other movies and other interesting topics out there too. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.